In the year 1370, the King of Denmark, one of the most powerful monarchs in northern Europe, signed a treaty of surrender. He had not been defeated by another king. He had been defeated by merchants, traders in wool, salt, and herring, men without a country, without a crown, and without a standing army, had just won a war against a kingdom. And the peace they dictated gave them something no merchant guild had ever held before, the right to veto who sat on the Danish throne. This is the story of the Hanseatic League, a network of trading cities that ruled the northern seas for 300 years. It had no capital, no king, and no borders. And yet it built an empire made not of land, but of trade routes. Our story begins a century earlier, on a small hill between two rivers, a few kilometers from the Baltic coast. In 1159, Duke Henry the Lion of Saxony rebuilt a burned trading post here and gave it a charter. The city was called Lübeck. It looked unremarkable, but its position was priceless. To the west lay the North Sea, and beyond it the wool of England and the cloth markets of Flanders. To the east lay the Baltic, a sea ringed with fish, timber, amber, wax, and furs, and hungry for everything the west produced. Between them sat the Jutland Peninsula, forcing every ship to sail hundreds of kilometers north around dangerous waters. Lübeck sat at the base of that peninsula, on its eastern side, and Hamburg on its western side, just 100 kilometers away. Goods could be carted between the two cities in days, skipping the sea passage entirely. Whoever controlled that shortcut controlled the door between two worlds. And there was one more advantage, invisible on most maps, but decisive: salt. South of Hamburg, the mines of Lüneburg produced it by the ton. In a world without refrigeration, salt was not a seasoning. It was food preservation itself, and the key to the richest fishery in Europe. Every autumn, herring swarmed the narrow straits off Scania in numbers so vast that chroniclers claimed you could scoop them out with your bare hands. Salted in barrels, with Lüneburg salt, shipped through Lübeck, herring became the protein of the continent. Every Friday, every Lent, every fast day in Christendom created demand. Fish and salt were the engine. The network grew around it. German merchants pushed east along the Baltic coast, founding or settling cities as they went: Rostock, Danzig, Riga. On the island of Gotland, the port of Visby became their first great hub for the Russian trade. And at the far end of the line, in Novgorod, they established a fortified compound called the Peterhof, a German trading island inside a Russian city. These merchants abroad faced the same problems: pirates, princes, tolls, and theft. Alone, a merchant from Cologne or Lübeck was easy prey. Together, they were something new. They began to call themselves a Hansa, an old word for a band, a company. Here is what makes the Hanseatic League unlike anything else in medieval Europe. It was never a country. It never had a founding document, a permanent army, or a capital. For most of its life, it refused to even define its own membership. Instead, it ran on four institutions. First, the Konters, fortified trading posts in foreign cities: the Steel Yard in London, the German Bridge in Bergen, the Peterhof in Novgorod, and the greatest of them in Bruges. Inside their walls, Hanseatic law applied, not local law. Second, shared law itself. Lübeck's city code was copied by more than 100 cities. A merchant from Rostock could stand in a court in Reval and know the rules. Third, the convoy. Hanseatic cogs, fat, high-sided cargo ships, sailed together, armed together, and boycotted together. And fourth, the Hanseatic, the assembly. When a crisis came, delegates from dozens of cities met, argued, and voted. Its sharpest weapon was not war. It was the embargo. When Bruges squeezed Hanseatic merchants, the League simply moved the entire contour out of the city, and Flanders' economy buckled until the privileges were restored. No flag, no king, just contracts, courts, convoys, and the credible threat of collective punishment. No capital on paper, but in practice, one city set the tone. The assemblies gathered in Lübeck, the seals hung from Lübeck parchment, and when the League spoke with one voice, the accent was unmistakably Lübeck's. The queen of the Hansa, they called her. Follow one ship, and you can see the whole system. She loads Lüneburg salt and Flemish cloth, and sails east. In Danzig, the salt goes ashore. Grain from the Polish plains comes aboard. In Riga, cloth is traded for wax and flax. At the Peterhof in Novgorod, the last bales of cloth by the real price. Fur, squirrel, sable, ermine, by the tens of thousands of pelts. Turn around. Grain to feed Norway. Stockfish from Bergen to feed the Rhineland. Wax to light every church in Europe. Timber, pitch, and hemp, the raw materials of every shipyard in the West, flow from the Baltic to the Atlantic powers, who cannot build a single warship without them. The Hansa didn't just carry goods. It set prices. Its barrel of herring was a standard measure from London to Novgorod. Its shilling was trusted coin. This is what economic infrastructure looked like in 1350, and one league owned all of it. Power like that eventually collides with the crown. In 1360, King Valdemar IV of Denmark, ambitious, broke, and brilliant, began seizing the choke points of the Baltic. First the Scania fisheries. Then, in 1361, his army stormed ashore on Gotland and sacked Visby, slaughtering the peasant levies outside the walls. He had grabbed the League by the throat, the herring, the straits, and the hub of the Russia trade, all at once. The League's first war against him failed. Their fleet was shattered off Helsingborg in 1362, and a humiliating peace followed. Valdemar joked that the Hansa were 77 geese, loud, fat, and harmless. The geese rearmed. In 1367, at Cologne, 57 cities signed a formal war confederation, the closest thing to a constitution the Hansa ever had. They allied with Sweden, with Mecklenburg, with Holstein. In 1368, their combined fleet burned Copenhagen, seized the Scanian castles, and choked off the Sound. Valdemar fled his own kingdom. And in 1370, in the Treaty of Stralsund, the Danish council surrendered. The League received the Scanian coast and its castles for 15 years, 2/3 of the Sound tolls, and a veto over the succession to the Danish throne. Merchants now confirmed kings. This was the Hansa at high tide. Empires of land fall to invasions. Empires of trade fall to competition, and the Hansa's decline came from a dozen directions at once. The herring, unbelievably, moved. In the early 1400s, the Great Shoals shifted from the Baltic Straits to the North Sea, into Dutch waters. The Dutch, once customers, became rivals. Their new herring buses could gut, salt, and barrel the catch at sea, and their ships sailed around Jutland directly, making Lübeck's precious shortcut optional. The East hardened too. In 1494, Ivan III of Moscow, having swallowed Novgorod, marched into the Peterhof, arrested the merchants, and closed the oldest contour forever. England's own merchants gnawed at the Steelyard's privileges. The territorial princes, Brandenburg, Poland, Denmark again, clawed back their cities one by one. And the world's center of gravity was moving. Portuguese ships were rounding Africa. Spanish silver was crossing the Atlantic. The Baltic, the pond the Hanse owned, was becoming a side sea of a much larger ocean. There was no final battle. The League faded the way a business fades, meeting by meeting, member by member. The Bruges contour moved to Antwerp and withered. The Steelyard in London was finally shut by Elizabeth I in 1598. The 30 Years' War wrecked what remained of the German trade towns. When the Hanseatic was summoned in 1669, only 9 cities bothered to send anyone. It was the last assembly ever held. 3 cities quietly kept the name alive: Lübeck, Bremen, and Hamburg, the free and Hanseatic cities. And the ghost never quite left. German license plates still carry the H, Hansestadt Hamburg, Hansestadt Lübeck. The Bundesliga has its Hansa Rostock. The airline that carries Germany's flag is called Lufthansa, the Air Hansa. A club of cities, bound by trade instead of a crown, negotiating as one while staying proudly independent. If that sounds familiar, it should. The Hanseatic League proved, 700 years ago, that you don't need an army to build an empire. You need a network. If you want more forgotten empires drawn on maps, subscribe. The next voyage is already charted.